I never thought I'd become a regular at the VFW hall on Maple Street, but grief has a way of leading you to unexpected places. It was 3 months after my dad's funeral, when I first pushed through those heavy double doors, carrying his Purple Heart in my jacket pocket like some kind of talisman I didn't know how to use. The place smelled like old wood polish and beer that had soaked into the floorboards over decades. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that particular shade of institutional yellow that makes everyone look slightly jaundiced. A few older men sat scattered around the main room, nursing drinks and watching a basketball game on the television mounted in the corner. Nobody looked up when I walked in. I appreciated that more than they could know. My name is Rowan, and I'm 28 years old, which made me easily the youngest person in that room by at least 30 years. I'd spent the last 3 months since Dad died trying to understand him better, trying to piece together the parts of his life he'd never really shared with me. He'd been a Marine in Vietnam, came back with medals and scars he never talked about, and then spent 40 years working at the post office like none of it had ever happened. The VFW membership card in his wallet had surprised me when I was going through his things. He'd never mentioned going there, never mentioned those Thursday nights he'd told Mom he was working late. I ordered a beer from the bartender, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She gave me a kind smile that said she'd seen plenty of lost-looking young people walk through those doors before. I took my beer and turned to survey the room, looking for somewhere to sit that wouldn't feel like I was intruding on anyone's space. That's when I saw him. He was sitting at the far end of the bar, a man who looked to be in his early 50s with silver threading through his dark hair. He had the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors, laugh lines around his eyes even though he wasn't smiling. He wore a faded denim shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms marked with old scars and newer tattoos. There was an empty stool next to him, and I started walking toward it, drawn by something I couldn't quite name. I was about 3 feet away when he turned and looked directly at me. His eyes were this striking shade of blue-gray, like storm clouds over the ocean. "Sorry," he said, his voice a low rumble. "That seat's taken." I stopped, feeling my face flush with embarrassment. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see anyone's stuff there." "It's taken," he repeated, but there was something in his expression that wasn't quite matching his words. Not hostility exactly, but something else. Something that looked almost like fear. I nodded and turned away, finding a spot at a small table near the wall instead. I sat there sipping my beer, trying not to feel like I'd already failed at whatever I was trying to do by coming here. The basketball game played on. Men talked in low voices. The bartender wiped down the counter in slow, methodical circles. And at the end of the bar, that silver-haired man sat next to his empty stool, staring down at his whiskey like it held answers to questions he was afraid to ask. His name was Marcus, though I wouldn't learn that until my 3rd visit to the VFW. I started coming every Thursday night, same as my dad must have done. I'd sit at my little table against the wall, drink 1 or 2 beers over the course of a couple hours, and watch the patterns of this place reveal themselves to me. The same men came on the same nights. They had their preferred seats, their usual drinks, their established rhythms of conversation and silence. And Marcus was always there, always at the end of the bar, always with that empty stool beside him that no one ever tried to take. I learned things about him just by watching. He drank whiskey, always the same brand, always neat. He knew everyone's name and they knew his, but he kept himself slightly apart, like he was with them, but not quite of them. He'd laugh at jokes, nod along to stories, but there was a guardedness to him, a careful distance he maintained, and sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, he'd glance at that empty stool next to him with an expression of such profound loneliness that it made my chest ache. On my 4th Thursday, I brought my dad's Purple Heart with me. I don't know what I thought would happen. Maybe I imagined someone would recognize it, would tell me stories about my father that would suddenly make everything make sense. Instead, I just sat at my table with the metal case in front of me, running my thumb over the smooth leather while I drank my beer. Marcus noticed. I saw him looking, saw the way his expression shifted when he recognized what it was. After about 20 minutes, he picked up his whiskey and walked over to my table. Up close, he was even more striking than I'd realized. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that seemed to take up more space than his physical form should allow. Your father's? He asked, gesturing to the Purple Heart. Yeah, he passed a few months ago, Vietnam, 1968. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then pulled out the chair across from me. May I? I nodded, surprised and suddenly nervous. He sat down and I could smell his cologne now, something woodsy and clean that made me think of pine forests after rain. What was his name? David. David Chen. He was with the 3rd Marines. Something flickered across Marcus's face, recognition maybe, or just the weight of too many names, too many faces from too long ago. I'm sorry for your loss, he said, and the way he said it made it clear he understood the specific shape of this grief, the particular emptiness left by a veteran father who'd kept his wars locked away. Were you over there too? I asked. He shook his head. Iraq. 2 tours, 2004 and 2006. Different war, same shit. He took a drink of his whiskey. Your dad come here? I think so. I found his membership card in his wallet, but he never told me about it. Never told me about a lot of things. Marcus nodded slowly. That's how it is sometimes. We keep things separate. The before, the during, the after. Try to keep them from bleeding into each other. He looked at me with those storm cloud eyes. You look like you're trying to find something. I'm trying to understand him, I admitted. I spent my whole life with this man, and I realized after he died that I barely knew him. All these rooms inside him that he kept locked. I thought maybe if I came here, sat where he sat, I might, I don't know, feel closer to him somehow. And do you? I considered the question honestly. Not really. Mostly I just feel lost. Marcus smiled then, a sad, knowing smile that transformed his face. Yeah, he said softly. I know that feeling. We talked for over an hour that night. He told me about his time in the service, about coming back to a country that didn't quite know what to do with its veterans anymore, about finding community in places like this where people understood without needing explanations. I told him about my dad, about growing up with a father who was physically present but emotionally distant, about the guilt I felt for not trying harder to reach him when I had the chance. When it was time to leave, Marcus walked out with me into the parking lot. It was early March, and the night air still had winter's bite in it. My breath misted in front of my face as I unlocked my car. You gonna come back? Marcus asked. Yeah, I said. I think I will. He nodded, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. Good. It's good to see young people here. Reminds us we're not just forgotten. I wanted to ask him about the stool, about why he kept it empty, about what he was protecting or preserving or mourning. But something in his posture told me it wasn't the right time. Some doors have to be opened from the inside. Over the next few weeks, Thursday nights became the highlight of my week. Marcus and I developed an easy friendship, the kind that forms between people who recognize something fundamental in each other. He'd save a spot at his table for me now, not the stool at the bar, but a proper table where we could sit across from each other and talk. We'd discuss everything and nothing, sports, politics, the small frustrations of daily life. He worked as a contractor, specializing in renovation work on old houses. I worked in IT, a job that paid well but left me feeling hollow most days. But we also talked about the deeper things. He told me about his nightmares, the ones that still came 15 years after his last deployment. I told him about my sexuality, about being gay in a family that had never quite known what to do with that information, about how my dad had gone silent for months after I came out at 22. Marcus listened without judgment, without trying to fix anything, just listened in, that way that veterans seem uniquely capable of, having learned that sometimes bearing witness is the only service you can offer. My dad never really accepted it, I told him one night. He didn't disown me or anything dramatic like that. He just went quiet about it, stopped asking about my life. We'd talk about the weather, about his garden, about anything except who I actually was. Marcus turned his whiskey glass in slow circles on the table. That's its own kind of violence, he said. That silence. Yeah, I felt tears prick at my eyes and blinked them back. The worst part is, I never got to know if he would have come around, if he would have eventually seen that I was still his son, that this was just one part of who I am. He died before we could get there. Maybe he was getting there, Marcus offered. Maybe that's part of why he came here, Sometimes we need to sit with our shit before we can let it go. Work through it in our own time. It was the kindest interpretation anyone had offered me, and I held onto it like a lifeline. As spring arrived and the days grew longer, I noticed changes in Marcus. He seemed lighter somehow, like something heavy he'd been carrying had shifted position, become slightly less burdensome. He smiled more. He'd touch my arm when he laughed at something I said, casual contact that sent electricity through my skin. I tried not to read anything into it, tried not to hope for something that probably wasn't there. But then there were moments that made me wonder. The way his eyes would linger on my face, the way he'd lean in close when the bar got loud, his breath warm against my ear, the way he'd find excuses to extend our evenings together, suggesting one more drink, one more game of pool, anything to keep from saying goodbye. I was falling for him. It was a slow-motion collapse, like a building giving way floor by floor, and I was powerless to stop it. Every Thursday I'd promise myself I'd maintain boundaries, keep things platonic, protect our friendship, and every Thursday I'd find myself leaning into his orbit, drawn by gravity I couldn't resist. It was late April when things shifted. We were sitting at our usual table, later than normal, because we'd gotten caught up in a conversation about music, trading stories about concerts we'd been to, bands that had shaped us. The VFW had mostly cleared out. Even the bartender was giving us looks that suggested she wanted to close up. "I should probably let you go," Marcus said, but he didn't move to get up. "Yeah," I agreed, also not moving. We sat there in the quiet, something unspoken hanging in the air between us. Marcus was looking at me with an intensity that made my heart race. His hand was on the table, inches from mine. I could see the pulse jumping in his throat. "Rowan," he said, my name rough in his mouth, "I need to tell you something." My stomach dropped. This was it. He was going to tell me he'd noticed how I looked at him, that he was flattered but not interested, that we should probably stop hanging out to avoid confusion. I braced myself for the rejection. "That stool at the bar," he continued, "the one I said was taken that first night you came in." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "It was for my partner, Daniel. He died 6 years ago. Cancer." Marcus's voice was steady, but his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "We met here, actually. He was a Vietnam vet like your dad. Came back in '69 and spent the next 40 years trying to outrun what he'd seen. We were together for 18 years. Couldn't get married legally until near the end, but we were married in every way that mattered." My breath caught. "Marcus, Let me finish," he said gently. "I kept that stool empty because I couldn't imagine anyone else sitting there, couldn't imagine letting go. And then you walked in, and you were so young and so lost, and you looked at me with these eyes that saw too much, and I panicked. Because I knew if I let you sit there, everything would change." "Knew what?" I whispered. He reached across the table and took my hand. His palm was warm and calloused and perfect. "That I could fall for you. That I wanted to fall for you. And I wasn't sure I was allowed to want that again. The world seemed to narrow down to the point where our hands connected. And now I think Daniel would be pissed at me for wasting 6 years sitting next to an empty stool when I could have been living." Marcus smiled, that full transformation smile that made him look 10 years younger. "Now I think maybe some seats are saved, not because we can't let go, but because we're waiting for the right person to come along." I don't remember which of us moved first. Suddenly we were standing, and then his hands were cupping my face, and then we were kissing in the empty VFW hall while the bartender pretended not to notice. He tasted like whiskey and possibility. His beard scratched against my skin. His hands were gentle and sure, holding me like I was something precious. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus pressed his forehead against mine. "I'm 53 years old," he said. "I've got baggage and nightmares and a mortgage. I'm not easy." "I'm 28, I countered. "I'm still figuring out who I am. I cry at commercials. I'm definitely not easy either." He laughed, the sound vibrating through both of us. "We're a mess." "Yeah," I agreed. "We really are. Want to be a mess together?" I kissed him again by way of answer. We took it slow after that, learning each other in increments. Marcus invited me to his house, a beautiful craftsman he'd restored himself, full of woodwork and stained glass and signs of a life well lived. We cooked dinner together, moved around his kitchen like we'd been doing it for years. He showed me pictures of Daniel, told me stories that made him real, made him someone I wished I could have known. "He would have liked you," Marcus said one night, both of us sitting on his couch with my head on his shoulder. "He had a thing for smart, intense guys who thought too much. Sounds like you have a type. Sounds like I'm a lucky man who gets to fall in love twice in one lifetime." I turned to look at him. "Love?" He met my eyes without hesitation. "Love? I know it's fast, and I know we should probably be more cautious, but I'm 53 years old, and I've learned that life's too short for probably and should. I love you, Rowan. I think I started loving you that first night when you looked so lost and determined all at once." "I love you too," I said, and it was the easiest truth I'd ever spoken. We started spending most nights together, either at his place or my apartment. He'd stay up with me when the grief hit, when missing my dad would crash over me like a wave. I'd hold him when the nightmares came, when Iraq invaded his sleep in sounds and smells and sensations. We learned each other's scars, the visible and invisible ones, and we loved each other, not despite them, but because of them, because they were part of the maps that had led us to each other. I still went to the VFW on Thursdays, but now Marcus and I went together. We'd sit at the bar sometimes, me on the stool that had been saved, him beside me where Daniel used to sit. The other veterans welcomed me fully once they understood I belonged to Marcus, that I was part of their community now, through love, if not through service. One Thursday in June, an older man approached our table. He was probably in his 70s, thin and weathered, with kind eyes behind thick glasses. "You said your dad was David Chen," he asked me. My heart jumped. "Yes. Did you know him?" "We served together in '68. He saved my life during an ambush near Khe Sanh." The man's voice shook slightly. "I tried to stay in touch after we got back, but David, he wanted to leave it all behind. I respected that. But I want you to know your father was one of the bravest men I ever met, and one of the kindest." Tears streamed down my face. Marcus took my hand, squeezed it tight. "He talked about you," the man continued. "Near the end of our tour, he'd gotten a letter from home, found out your mom was pregnant. He carried that letter everywhere, said he was fighting to get home to his son, to be the kind of father his own dad never was. Whatever distance you felt from him, it wasn't because he didn't love you. Sometimes the weight of what we've seen makes it hard to be fully present, but the love was there. Always." After the man left, I sat there crying while Marcus held me. It wasn't the complete understanding I'd been seeking, wasn't a magic key that unlocked all my father's mysteries, but it was something. It was enough. That night, lying in Marcus's bed with moonlight streaming through the window, I thought about all the paths that had led me here, my father's death, the VFW, a saved stool and a guarded heart. The courage it takes to let someone in after loss has taught you how much losing hurts. "Thank you," I whispered into the darkness. Marcus stirred beside me. "For what?" "For saving that stool. For waiting for me even though you didn't know you were waiting. For teaching me that grief doesn't mean we stop living." He pulled me closer, his body warm and solid against mine. "Thank you for being brave enough to sit down, for seeing past my walls, for reminding me that hearts can break and break and mend again, and that's not weakness. That's just being human." We fell asleep like that, two men who'd found each other in a place built for remembering, learning together how to honor the past while building something new. The VFW still stands on Maple Street. We still go every Thursday, but now that stool at the bar holds someone who's very much alive, very much present, very much loved, and sometimes when the light hits just right, I swear I can feel my father's approval, and Daniel's too, both of them watching over us with the particular pride of those who fought for a world where love like ours could exist openly, could be celebrated, could be exactly what it is. A small miracle in a complicated world worth every bit of courage it takes to claim it.